my oldest son, who is 21 and a half, he'll be 22 in January, was my first experience with sort of autism spectrum disorder. So when he was young, when he was 2, he was very vocal, extremely vocal from the beginning. He and actually this would have been back before he was 2. When he was about 9 months old, his first word was envelope, and I remember thinking, he was my oldest, and I remember thinking, I don't think that's normal. I don't think that's the norm for children to speak such big words in the beginning. Good morning, Mom. My mom's on here. So when he had this vast vocabulary, and we really enjoyed it. I mean, he was our oldest, and when you're a young mom, you go, oh, well, he's my big boy, and he's got this big vocabulary. And then now I'm going to say something that's slightly controversial. It might be highly controversial for some people, but I'm not willing to debate like the finer or negative points of vaccination at this point. Actually, not ever, because unless you've walked in these shoes, you don't have a lot of credibility in my mind. So when it comes to what happened next, was he had the MMR when he was 2, and then he didn't talk for like 2 weeks, and then he never got back to where he was before that. And so from there on, his childhood changed, and not in a bad way. I was a young mom. When I say young, I was 26 when he had the MMR, and I didn't know any better. I didn't know that the sort of tantruming that he would go to was out of the norm, and until I had friends that were like, "Hey." Something's going on here. And it still didn't really sink in for a long time. I would say when he was 5, when we still lived in Salt Lake City at the time. He was born in Utah, and we still lived in Salt Lake City at the time. Right before he was 5, and right before we moved to Idaho, I actually went to see a naturopath for myself for some thyroid issues that I was having. And she and I talked a lot, and she went in to see our son, and it took one appointment, and she said, there's definitely something going on. Whether or not you have him tested further is completely up to you. You're planning to keep him at home, but here's the first thing I would do. And the first thing that she suggested was diet elimination. At the time, I was kind of skeptical, but not 100% skeptical. I thought, all right, well, she's asking me to do the same. So she asked, at the time, in order to get my thyroid under control, she asked me to give up dairy, and we gave up wheat at the same time. And it was just wheat. It wasn't all gluten at the time. And so keep in mind, this was almost 15, 16 years ago. So this was not, today where everybody's like, yes, start there. So when we started there, we started with just wheat. We still kept spelt in our diet. And in fact, I got pretty good at making spelt bread and using spelt for a lot of things. And I remember at the time the company Vita Spelt was like, they were like gods to me, because they had pasta, and I'm Italian, and so pasta is a big part of our lives. And before that, I had been making my own pasta, and so there were a lot of changes that we made. But I remember the first change being that we sort of got rid of dairy and got rid of wheat. And the funny thing about the dairy was because my son was a heavy milk drinker, and he only nursed until he was 9 months old, my first child. And I just didn't know what I know now about breastfeeding and about the longevity of it. And and between child number 1 and child number 2, I learned a lot. That's part of this learning curve that is parenting. And so we had sort of gone through this elimination. And I remember my ex-husband had cholesterol problem, and he came home from the doctor one time, and he was shaking his head, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, the doctor said my cholesterol dropped like 50 points. And the only thing I could tell him that I did different was that I eliminated dairy. And the doctor was like super skeptical of it, super skeptical. And so there were all of these like funny signposts that for the time being, we were dairy free for probably probably 5 years, and probably wheat free. Maybe, no, not 5 years. I'm lying to you. At least 3. And so during that time period, what we saw was that my son had, he wasn't not autistic. He still had autism, but the behavior was night and day different. So early on, we were wheat free, we were dairy free, and we were pretty media free, because we were, as a new Waldorf mom, and we were following these guidelines. And I will say that before that, when he was 2 and 3, right around these times when we knew there was something going on, but didn't actually, know what was going on, he wasn't TV free. And that was kind of before my more complete immersion into Waldorf and sort of taking this on. So here he was, and somebody on here mentions on Instagram, Carolyn mentions inulin, fish oil. Yes, we did those things. We did those things for sure. But we also did, we were also dairy free and wheat free. Those were the main things right there that I saw the biggest difference in, that and media. So for his young life, until he was 7 or, well, probably 8 was when I got divorced. His diet was really clean, and he had no media. And when I say no media, I will say we watched a movie one time a week in those days, one time a week. And it was because we had moved from Utah to Idaho, and there were just some times that it was just too cold to be outside in the winter. And think like Arctic tundra. It was really cold. And I always sort of joke that it's Hoth, and not all of Idaho. There's just this little corner of southeast Idaho that's below the Tetons where it's insanely cold. And so anyways, we would watch one movie a week. And I will tell you, these were the movies. I remember Little Women was like the first time that I saw Harry cry at a movie. And I'm not talking about the new Little Women. I'm talking about the old one. And if my mom is still watching, she will probably remember that, as we sort of had a little giggle about that. Not giggle as in making fun of him, but like more like a, that's really interesting. So it touched him. So at that point, he still had, we could feel some empathy in there, but it was fading as he, as he continued to sort of move through. And I have a mom here that asks, what do you recommend for older children with autism spectrum disorder that wants media 24/7? I will get there, I promise. Stay tuned. So we sort of walked through this this period where it was fairly golden. We had not nearly the tantruming that that we would have had otherwise, because anytime I wanted to test whether or not those allergens were his ticket. And the other thing I will say is we did no dyes at that point, like none. And so because red dye was we knew was going to be a problem anyway, so we eliminated all dyes, we eliminated dairy, we eliminated wheat, and we were very low media, very low. And so there was probably 2 years that was really pretty golden for us, for his childhood, and that was between 5 and 7. That does not mean he was without challenge. It just means that the tantruming was down, like way down. And like I said, whenever I wanted to test whether or not those things were the things that were working, I would allow wheat or dairy into our lives, and he would fall apart for a couple of days, and then we'd get back on. The interesting thing about dairy is it stays in your gut for a long time. So if you're detoxing dairy, and I know the same is true for gluten, if you're detoxing those things, they stay in your gut for a long time. So you cannot assume that, first, when you take the allergen away, that's one layer of helpfulness. But until it gets completely out of their system, you're going to still see some tantruming and some struggles. So that was our early childhood situation. Then I got a divorce when he was about 8. And in ramping up to that, there was a lot of contention in my home. And there we could definitely see that contention was part of the soup, part of the mix. And so whenever there was contention, there's definitely more struggle, more tantruming, disproportionate to other children that are going through that. And so I got divorced, and then all bets were off when it came to diet. I didn't have any control over his diet. The first thing my ex-husband did was go buy a Game Boy, or not a Game Boy, a GameCube. And they went from no media the very next day to having complete access to everything all the time. And that was really insanely hard. So from the time he was 8 till the time he was, I really saw a huge shift when he was about 12. It turned everything upside down. And I remember my mom, who I would say, Mom, there's something going on. And she'd be like, she said these words to me, Mom, if you're still listening, I don't know if you remember this conversation. She said, oh, honey, he's just like you were when you were little. And I was like, really? I was this bad? I was like this? Like, I remember thinking to myself, she's nuts. There's no way he is like this, like I was when I was a child. And then I can remember, it was right after my divorce, and it was Christmas time. And my ex-husband and I were in Salt Lake City visiting family. So he was with his family and I was with my family. And he had called and wanted to see, I had the kids, and he wanted to know if Harry wanted to go to a basketball game. We're Jazz fans living in Utah. So, wanted to know if he wanted to go to a basketball game. But Harry was like enthralled in doing something, some Connects thing or something, Legos. And of course he said no. And my mistake was not probing further. Are you sure you don't want to go? Daddy's wants to, take you to this game. You'll go and have fun. You sure you don't want to go? And but he didn't, and he rushed it off. And so then my ex-husband said, well, does Jacob, our second son, want to go? And Jacob was all over it. Dad time. He wanted to go be with Dad. So I let Jacob go. And it was the worst tantrum from Harry ever. Like, it was so mammoth, but it happened in my mom's house. And I can remember because we had to hold him down, and because he was trying to hurt himself, and he was like, and he was at the time this skinny little kid, but had there's so much like adrenaline that goes through them when they're tantruming that it's really hard to control and to keep them from hurting themselves and hurting somebody else and property damage and all that. And I can remember at the end of it, my mom, we're sitting, she had this landing at the bottom of the stairs. That's where it was all happening, tile floor. And she sat down and she goes, holy cow, how often does that happen? And I remember that being like her first ticket, like, oh, wait, he was not just like Melissa. There is definitely something going on. And after that, she was my biggest supporter. And we really were on this path of how do we manage it when we know that the only time that he gets what he needs is when he was with me. And at the time I had 50-50 custody, which is incredibly hard anyway. But I'm going to tell you, ladies, if any of you are going through this and you have kids with special needs, before you go through it and before you decide on custody, you need to get things in place from doctors that become court orders on how your child is to be fed and taken care of, because that will make a huge difference. So he was about 8 years old at the time, lived in Idaho. The way we would work on tantrums, and they came on a fairly regular basis because his diet was not under control. And when I say regular, I would say anywhere from every day to more than once a day, to it would go 2 weeks and I'd be like, whew, we haven't had a tantrum in 2 weeks. So it would very much vary and depend when his diet was not, and the media use was not under control. A lot of the tantruming would happen around media. And so even though we were still media free at my house, they were not media free at their dad's. And so, excuse me, a lot of the ways that I controlled it in those early years were like my best friend was Rescue Remedy. So if you don't know what Rescue Remedy is, it's a homeopathic tincture or spray. And I have to tell you, there were years that it did not come in a spray. Like now it comes in gum, and it comes in pellets, and it comes in spray, but it used to just come in this tiny little tincture bottle that is glass. And so he could be flailing around, and I'd be trying to get and it's hard to get the lid off because the rubber on the stopper is really tight around that glass. So I'd be trying to get that lid off, and he'd fling his arm, and the $20 bottle of Rescue Remedy would go and smack against the wall and break. So I was in that situation more than one time. But if I could get it open, things were golden. People ask me all the time, do you practice attachment parenting? Yes, I do. Not with him. I learned very early on, and I want to qualify that because I said that to a mom yesterday, a new mom, our mom that's got a new diagnosis, and she's a local friend. And I said, I have to tell you, you cannot practice attachment parenting with him. And she said, I'm confused because I thought attachment parenting was meeting the needs of the child. I said, oh, okay. So you're that brand of attachment parenting. You're not the brand of attachment parenting that just says anything goes. Because there are actually definitely like really two different camps. There's the meet the needs of the child because it's what the child needs, and mom is paying attention to that. And then there's meet the needs of the child and just let them run crazy. That's not attached. This one is not attachment parenting. This one is. But there are so many people in the other camp that I often I have to step in and say, this is different. Working with these children in an attached way looks extremely different. For autism spectrum disorder, I would say probably any special need, definitely for sensory processing disorder, it looks different because their brains work different. So where we can appeal to the empathy and the sensibilities of another child just through them doing what we do and through them, sort of understanding social cues, you cannot do that with a child on the spectrum because they don't understand. They don't understand. They need extremely firm black and white parenting. And by that, I mean, you say that you're going to do this, you best follow through. Because if you don't, they will think that you will never follow through. So you have to have very clear parameters and be very diligent about yourself and how you're going to present in front of this child. And so I can remember the worst tantrum I was ever called to help with my ex-husband was because, here we were divorced, and it was right, actually, I think you and I had just met and just started dating. How do when I was called to navigate that tantrum? I think we had just started dating.
Yeah.
And my ex-husband had made some crazy parenting things that came out of his mouth, and my son was freaking out. And again, it's because they're incredibly black and white. And it seems like the words were something like, I'm going to call the police if you don't stop what you're doing. And I remember my son was he was falling apart. You want to be very careful with your words, and you want to be very careful to not be angry yourself. You're going to be angry, but you need to keep it in check. Because the words that you say will stick with them forever. Much more so than a child that is not on the spectrum. Much more so. You have the many opportunities to fix a lot of things with the child that's not on the spectrum than you do with a child that is. I mean, yes, they're generally incredibly forgiving, but that the words that we say, because they are so black and white, the words that we say have to be the right words. So if you feel like you're failing miserably, you need to sit back and what I would always do after a tantrum is go, all right, what could I have done differently? What could I have done differently? Because that would then inform me. It would inform me as I went into the next space. It would inform me as I walked forward, and it would inform me as there's a mom on here. It's okay, honey. I'm not upset at you. Sometimes I push the wrong button too. Those buttons are in the weirdest of places.
Peggy McLaughlin said she's still using Rescue Remedy with her 21-year-old.
Oh my gosh, yes. Harry asked for Rescue Remedy now. He's like, Mom, turn the Rescue Remedy. But no, what I would do is when we would have a tantrum, and it would be epic, and it to the point where I was exhausted. I would step back and go, okay, what happened? Where was the tipping point? The tipping point is what you're looking for when it comes to catching the tantrums. there's a tipping. If you're thinking to yourself right now, I don't know where the heck the tipping point is, then you need to stop and observe, because the tipping point is there. Always, like 100% of the time, it's there. It's just about whether or not you're in tune to it. If you're not watching and you're not paying attention and you're not holding the space, then you're not going to catch the tipping point. The tipping point is always about 5 minutes before you think it is. At least in the beginning, as you're starting to observe, and then as you're like sort of working through that, you can start to see, oh, it's about to happen. Pull the reins back in, and you have to get good at doing that. And yes, that means you're going to have to be on all the time. All the time. There is never a time when you are not on with a child that has autism spectrum disorder or other special needs, because I would venture to say even children that have other special needs, there's a tipping point. If they are tantruming in any way, it is generally out of frustration that has turned to anger, and they can't figure out how to deal with it. And while other children, they'll tantrum and they'll get over it, these guys, it will be really bad. And it will be something that feels like it kicked your butt, literally. And maybe it did. I mean, there are many times that I was like, oh, I'm so exhausted from that. And he would feel really badly afterwards. We probably went through that until he was about 9. The 9-year change was incredibly hard for him. A mom on Instagram says, I wish I could have heard this talk 10 years ago. I need to know how to repair a relationship with your spectrum child. Okay, we'll talk about that. Because I will say that even though I was the hardest parent on Harry, I was harder on Harry than I was on anybody else, he and I probably have the tightest bond. And that's because even though I was really hard on him and really firm with him, I'm also the parent that always went to bat for him, still do. And always was, I always called him on his crap, like always. You have to be the parent that calls them on their crap. Like there are things that other people can say to him that he would be fighting mad. If I say them to him, he'll be like, oh, you're right. I will say that around 9, things started to change. And then around 12, they changed even further. So around 9 is when a couple of things happened. We were in litigation with my ex-husband. I sought an official diagnosis, but only for that reason. And I'll tell you why about that in a minute. I sought an official diagnosis, and that's when we told him that you've got something going on. We sought an official diagnosis because my ex-husband wouldn't feed him properly. and it would become this like Coney Island at his house, and then I would spend the week trying to deal with his tantrums, and it would just take forever. So it made that transition period between houses really hard. So things that ended up happening at the end of that were, after that first, as we'd been in court several times, the first 6 years Eric and I were married, we spent in litigation with my ex-husband. Fun stuff. But after that first time, what we ended up with was visitation was different, and that helped. That helped for a period of time. And but it allowed for me to be able to keep him cocooned from the media. Once the diet was out the window, the biggest trigger was media. And so sadly, it became a situation where, because it was happening so much at the other house, it wasn't happening at all at my house. And if I could go back and change anything, I probably would have changed that a bit. And we would have like no media until after 4 o'clock, no media on school days. You know, we would have rules as we went through. The only reason why I would change that a bit is I think I would probably go back, if I could go back and do anything, help him regulate more. He does a fairly good job now, but it takes him it takes him like sort of going to a bad place before any kind of cycles before he comes back. And but he is much better at transitioning from one to the other. The transition between having video, audio, gaming, whatever media, because I treat all media the same, whatever media it was, the transition from that to being with humans again is incredibly hard for them, because they're so much in their head and they're so checked out that it really is it's like a reintegration period. I remember the day that we told him, and I'm telling you this because I want to help you if you are trying to figure out how to sort of have this conversation with your child. I can remember the day, and it wasn't our finest parenting moment, was it, dear? That was a day that, and that's probably why we remember it, though. And it was, I remember very vividly, we were in Idaho. We lived in Idaho Falls at the time, and we were at Target, and I had everybody except for, because Soraya wasn't born yet. And so, we were a big family already. We had 4 kids with us at the time, and we were at Target. And I don't even remember what time of year it was, but it seems like it was colder because it seems like we were bundled up. But he would get in this repetition of saying the same thing over and over and over and over. And it was so much that Eric was like, enough. But it was one of those, you see in the movies when somebody shouts and then everything goes quiet right before they shout. And so their shouting sounds way louder than it would have if everything was still going on. So it was like somehow all of the powers of the earth, just as Eric is yelling.
What happened was he kept repeating this.
Right.
I said, stop repeating that. And he corrected me and said, actually, this is what I'm
really saying. Yeah, it was like a different, right. Because it wasn't just that he had been saying it all through Target.
It was like to the dump, to the dump.
Yeah,
to the dump.
It was that
slightly different.
It was that Eric was like, you need to stop saying, and it was to the dump, or it was something like that. It was like this repetition, and he was like, actually, that's not what I'm saying. And that's when Eric like, that's one of those. My stepdad doesn't mean he's just adjusting.
My frustration is, I just need you to stop doing whatever it is. And
and that's where though, when you look back on it, what we really should have said was, stop talking.
Yeah.
Because that would have been a whole different story. However, we would not have had what came after that, which was a very big tender mercy. So he has this like, Eric shouts, and then Harry has this tantrum. And we get to the car, and we're trying to, buckle toddlers in the car and get everybody situated in the car and settle Harry down. And we had a stop to make right after that. And I remember sending everybody else in the store except for he and I. And so he and I sat in the car. And I said, we have to have a conversation, and it's going to feel a little bit weird. And he said, okay. And I said, you have this thing called autism spectrum disorder. And he said, is that why I'm so different? I'm different from everybody around me. I mean, it was so like, it hit me like a knife, like, oh my gosh, you already know there's something going on, but you didn't say anything to me. And I remember thinking, I remember like pulling him close and hugging him and saying yes. And then he wanted to know, like, how do I fix it? And so for every mom out there who wants to shout at me that you need to celebrate this, I would say to you, there is not a day that goes by in his life that he doesn't go, I wish I didn't have this. It's yes, he has it, and we celebrate the human being that he is. But every day is like navigating something different for these guys. Every day. And it is hard, and like harder than the rest of us think that it is. And I remember that day we sort of had this talk, and I said, like, it's like you have these, because he was huge into building Legos. So it's like you have this Lego instruction book that is life. And each one tells you what you're supposed to do. But sometimes your instructions get really fuzzy. He said, that's exactly what it's like, Mom. I know what I'm supposed to do, but it's so clouded and so fuzzy that sometimes I just can't do it. And it was this amazing conversation. He was 9 at the time. It was so, actually it was 9, probably almost 10. It was so sobering for me to know that he knew that he already was, so if you think your kids don't realize that they're different from other kids, you're wrong. They know. And giving him the words helped him so much. So much. It helped him really, like, not internalize there's something wrong with me, but internalize, like, oh, wait a minute. So we had this long conversation. I said, you are going to have to work harder than other people at understanding those instructions, because other people see them very clearly, and for you, they're fuzzy. So for you, you're almost going to have to, like, put on glasses and, you know, like, things that are not 100% are lost on them. He's like, glasses? I have to wear special glasses. I said, no. But you're going to have to look harder at those instructions for them to be clear. And you're going to have to trust me, because I'm going to have to up my game so that I can help you through this. Because if you don't trust me, then we're not going to get anywhere. And you're going to struggle more. And from that moment on, he trusted me 100%. Doesn't mean we didn't have struggles, because we had a lot. But he trusted me 100%. Did you have a question or comment over there?
Oh, it was just going back to where we talked about him repeating it himself. Kristen Lattimore says, my son does that. He finds something that catches his attention and repeats it all day for long days. We have lots of people that are sending hearts. And
it's definitely, if you've walked the walk, then you know what I'm talking about. You know that what I'm saying is true. That it's humbling, because I have to tell you how many times as a mom I've been on my knees, like, crying, like, why did I make that choice? Why did I not know? How could I have changed it? How could I, and have been told, well, you're supposed to learn from this. And you're like, oh, all right, fine. And not only am I supposed to learn from this, because it's not all about me, it's really all about Harry and how the world sees him and how he has to deal with the world. So from that point on, he learned to be able to say, my name is Harry, shake people's hand. I have autism spectrum disorder, so if I say something silly, please forgive me. Please let me know. He had to get really, which is really hard, because a lot of kids on the spectrum, that humility piece is not there. You are going to have to develop it. You're going to have to develop it. And you're going to have to help them be able to take criticism, and when they can diffuse it with some humor, then because it takes people off guard when when he says that, they start to kind of laugh. At least when he was younger, they would kind of laugh, but also appreciate the fact that he would say that. So you also have to frame this. So this was more than 10 years ago. And people weren't talking about it like they're talking about it now. You know, everywhere here, people are talking about it. Yep.
Kristen Lattimore says, my son has not been diagnosed yet. In SC, it's a 2-year wait list for autism diagnosis.
Oh my gosh. So this is what I'm going to tell you I did. And again, this was like way back before it was like everybody was getting a diagnosis. If you know there's something going on, trust your gut and walk with it. Just walk with it. Trust your gut. Do the research. Do the things that you know will work. So in our case, it was wheat and dairy and red dye. And that might not be your allergen. But that is the most, because they're inflammatory on the brain, those are like some of the most, the biggest ones. Do your own diet elimination. I'm pretty stubborn, if y'all haven't noticed. So I was not willing to wait for anybody to tell me anything. I read and I thought, all right, well, I'm going to try this. And we had already gotten this like wheat and dairy free thing from our naturopath when we lived in Utah. So we were still going with that, trying to. But of course, we had then this all bets were off diet situation. So I remember going to the psychiatrist to get a diagnosis. So we had been referred to, we had a counselor at the time who we were working with because the kids, just a family counselor, because they were kids of divorce and we were trying to make sure that we were covering all the bases. And I said to him, I think I need to see somebody else for Harry. I said, I'm having the hardest time getting any help when it comes to his dietary stuff. I need somebody to back me up. And he said, I got your guy. So I went to it was a psychiatrist. At the time, they did this whole battery of testing for autism stuff that I'm sure they still do. But like I said, like she said, it's like a 2-year wait. It's a big deal. Like when I hear moms, when I'm just like, just call and get in to see somebody, and they're like, yeah, I'm on the list and it's 2 months away. It feels like forever. So start doing things now. Start doing things now while you're waiting. So I remember he went in, he had this battery of testing that was probably a week long, And at the end, I sat down with the doctor and he said, I don't know what to tell you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you're already diet eliminating, you're already low on media. He said, I will write in your chart that you need that what you're doing is the right thing. He said, but if I could get the parents that I work with to do half the stuff that you do, their kids would be in better shape. And so, yeah, that was like a pat on my back, but at the same time, I was like, you're not giving me any information I don't already have. At the time, I remember thinking that was so frustrating. And he recommended that I go to this like parent support group. And I'm going to tell you, I went one time. No, I lie. I think I went twice. And this is why I didn't go back. I was not into going and sitting and listening to other parents complain about what was going on with their kids. And part of that is my temperament. Maybe if I wasn't a cleric, then it would be okay. But as a cleric, I was like, I don't need to sit and complain to you about my kid to know that there's something going on with my kid. What I need to do is for you to tell me what you're doing to make yours different. And none of them were doing anything different. You know, I watched when I would go there, a lot of them would bring their kids with them and they'd be sitting in the corner on the Game Boy. And I knew I knew instinctively that was not what Harry needed. It was not what he needed. He did not need to be more disconnected. Mom over here says, OT and consultant were the same for us. Great. We were doing everything, not so great, for other guidance that they feel they can give you. Yes, that's exactly it. I feel like it's a double-edged sword when you know everything. And I'm not saying I know everything, but when you know what you know, it's kind of a double-edged sword because then people can't teach you anything when it comes to that, which it's okay because I knew I was doing what I needed to do. Excuse me, instinctively, because we were already low media with regards to Waldorf, this gave me the backup. So from the time he was 9 to the time he was 12, there was struggle. But I will say, for those of you who are in the depths of early childhood, this is the hardest time, Mom. It gets better. They get older, they start to understand more. But I will give you this caveat. It doesn't get better if you don't stay on top of it. If you don't stay on top of it and you let them run crazy and you do not are not firm with your boundaries and you do not make sure that bedtime is right and you do not make sure that they're eating the good things, guess what? It does not get better. It's going to get worse. So you've got to be on top of it, and it takes diligence. It takes you being able to submit yourself. It takes prayer and meditation. It takes getting breaks. So I'm going to tell you, if you're not getting any respite time, get respite time. The thing that I think is the hardest when I talk to attached parents that are on the cell say, but I don't do babysitters. And I go, get over yourself. You need it. Get over it. You need to find somebody that you trust to help you with your child. And then you need to step away. You cannot wear the attached badge of honor with these kids. You have to step away from it. And unless you do, you are going to beat yourself up. You're going to do harm to your health. And you're going to struggle in your relationship with your child. I can't say that in a nice way. You just have to do it. You've got to get a break. Getting a break was the best thing that I could do for myself and the best thing I could do for Harry. Yes.
I had some comments. Kristen says, I've done so much research. We have him on BioRay Kids Detox. He was so sick as a newborn, and I think that's contributed to the autism. Mm-hmm. And then Peggy McLaughlin says, our diagnosis didn't happen until 17. We pursued the ASD for 12 years, several different children's hospitals and psychiatrists. She says, trust your gut and never give up.
Yep, absolutely. I totally agree, mamas. You've got to trust your gut. You have to, because you are intimately intertwined with this child, not just physically, but also spiritually. You know there's something going on. And one thing that I found, that Harry and I both found, that was a very, he had these other strengths that we really worked on. And the strengths really helped him feel good about himself. And so sort of going through at 12, in our religion, at 12, they get, they sort of pass this milestone and they get the priesthood in our faith. And we were like, so there's preparation that has to happen. And even though these kids are pretty black and white, some of them really like to bend to the truth. Bless you.
Oh, I have a comment.
They really, okay, hold on. They really like to bend the truth. And so Harry was really good at lying. And I can remember Eric is the one, this dad is usually the one that confers the priesthood. And Eric said, if you don't quit lying, I'm not doing it. And because Harry was like, oh, wait a minute. I want this. All the other boys are getting this. This is something that is important to me. It's important to my faith. And what? I have to stop lying? Okay. It was like that. Turned it off. Turned it off, because even though they're super black and white, they also can, like, they make a habit and they'll quit, like, immediately. If there's enough in it for them. So we always try to work on things that that we knew would build him up, that we knew would make him strong, that we knew would help him with like going forward. When from the time he was probably 8 or 9, I would make him, we had a good friend that was an occupational therapist, and he would say, you need to, because you know where the tipping point is, you need to get him to the edge of the tipping point and sort of smooth out that edge. So he hated classical music, but the occupational therapist was like, nope, you need to put some classical music on headphones for him and make him go 10 minutes. So at first we made it a game. Other things, like he was always concerned about the time, so we had to cover up all the clocks at times because he would freak out about the clocks. Then there was a period of time when he was struggling with social interaction with other adults. And so I would make him make 5 adult contacts in a day that were not his dad and I. And so I didn't care if he had to go talk to 5 neighbors. And I told this story before, that during that time period, we were all at the movies. All of us. We went to see the movie. It was cheap. It was a cheap movie. There's this cheap movie theater in Idaho Falls where it's like the dollar theater. Just about everybody can afford to go. So here we are sitting, and because we saved so much on the admittance, we got popcorn. And when you have 5 children, you can't just get popcorn. You got to get the refillable kind. So I remember we're sitting there, and the movie hadn't even started yet. And so we're all sitting there. We're all in a row. And Harry's here next to me, and then there's me, and then there's kids in between Eric and I. And the popcorn comes to me, and it's empty. And I turned to him, I said, okay, go and have this refilled. And he goes, but Mom, I already made 5 contacts today. I said, I don't care. Get up and go get this filled up. All right? I mean, that's what's so funny, is he would lie, but I'd be like, I know you're lying. He cannot lie to save his life at all. Even as an adult, I'm like, dude, I see right through you. But it's because they don't have a poker face. They just don't have a poker face. They could try. And actually, through all of this, the last time we were in court, and we were dealing with therapists, the therapist actually said, I think your ex-husband has ASD. I said, I think you're right. I could always tell when he was lying. And he'd be like, what's funny is that other people can tell when they're lying, but honestly, they might believe the lie so much that to them is the reality. And I know that happens. That happens at times. So lessons. Let's talk lessons, and let's talk, we've been going for almost an hour. Let's talk lessons, and let's talk longevity. So lessons. Harry didn't have a problem with the stories ever. He actually loved the stories. So I would say, even though my guess is, Kristen, the reason why your son is having the trouble with the stories is because they're not black and white. And they are not like cut and dry. Although a lot of them are. It's just in how, I would seek out those more. The Grimm's tales are not logical, usually. I mean, sometimes I think they're incredibly logical, but I think some of them you go, what? His head got cut off? What? Or whatever the storyline, punchline might be. When it comes to the summarizing, it will be harder for them to summarize. So you will definitely have to work with them. So you definitely want to do the retelling. We're talking about the early years. Have them do the retelling to you. And it is always very interesting to me, the difference between a child on the spectrum doing the retelling, because they generally focus on one thing in the story, versus a neurotypical child. They will tell you the whole story. But so I would say, but what about this part of the story? And they go, yeah, but this is what's important. And I'm seeing it now with Soraya. So Soraya has sensory processing disorder, and she was speech delayed. She was a preemie. She has a host of soup, but because I've been through it before, I knew what I was looking for. So for her, it's definitely, there's a lot of markers that are exactly the same. When it comes to the recall on the story, they tend to hone in on one part, and it generally tends to be the negative part. Don't tend to look at the whole thing. When it came to the fables in grade 2, it was really hard for Harry to get any of them. And because the way that we present the stories, we don't tell them what we don't tell them what the moral is, and so they're supposed to get it themselves. And I can remember I was teaching Jacob, and Harry was in the other room. He's like, I get it. He was listening to my story. I finally get it. And so it was like 2 years later. So he was like 10 and Jacob was 8 going through the fables, and Harry was like just finally had all these light bulbs going off. So there tends to be a bit of a delay. With the 9-year change, I saw changes in Harry almost 12. With the 12-year change, it just didn't feel like it. We really got a break. He was constantly moving into that new space, and it really just took a lot of patience on my part. Show me a story often with them. And then another mom says, my son enjoys the stories when I don't have the book in my hand. Yep, you have to tell them and not read them. I have to tell them in a roundabout way or on a mild walk or a different activity. As soon as I lift up a book to read, it's a struggle. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. I will say that I definitely think that telling is better than reading. In Waldorf, we sort of do that anyway, but for kids on the spectrum, because they're kind of, they're not waiting for you to mess up, but because they are so black and white, if you've got the book in your hand, they want you to be reading 100% from the book. They don't want you to be telling it yourself. So if you put the book away, then they sort of can let go of that a bit. Mom says here, my 4-year-old makes me feel like an ogre for limiting media and tantrums, but she won't play on her own, and with chores, I can't entertain all the time. Yeah, so I would say you've got to tune into, for the younger ones, you have to tune into what it is that they like that's not media. It's not media. And I think the thing with media is it's kind of got to be, you've got to come up with rules that will work for you, and then you have to stick to them, because more so than with other children, the rules that you make in your home, if you're not willing to follow them, don't make them, especially if you've got children on the spectrum, because they are learning 100% from you when it comes to how to act. And so if you are doing one thing, if you're waffling, then they're going to think that that's okay, or they're going to think that it's that you don't always have to hold your word. And so you want to have, as they get older, conversations about, well, this is why I broke this rule, or this is an instance where I broke the rule. See the difference between what happened here and maybe what you're wanting to do. And so sometimes it might be like a moral issue, or sometimes it might be an ethical issue. Those are things that are really difficult for them to grasp. So you will have to take your time and really sort of go through those things. I think when it comes to media, we should be limiting media anyway. I see how much media this planet is inundating themselves with, not just the kids, but the adults too. And it's insane. I think we have to back up. If we want these kids to connect, we have to be willing to connect. We have to be willing to stop what we're doing and connect with them. So for Soraya, from a very, very early age, she loves, because she didn't talk, she loves art. Find something that your child likes. When Soraya was 4, she had a paint palette of her own, because otherwise I would be getting out the watercolor paper every day. She would paint all day if I let her in those days, before I sort of caught on to this. So I got her a paint palette of her own. And I like the good ones. I like the ones that are stock mark, because you can pop out the colors and pop in new colors. I like that a lot. And I also would limit, especially when she was younger, I would limit how many colors she had. Like now she's like, woohoo, it's all open to me. Where have these colors been my whole life? She's 7 now. But when she was like 3 and 4, I only have like 3 or 4 colors in there. So I would pop everything else out. She had her own paintbrush, you know, and she had access to paper. And I can remember we went to the zoo one time, and this was before she was really speaking. We went to the zoo and looked at the elephants, and we came home and she drew 20 elephants, or painted 20 elephants exactly the same. Exactly the same, in different colors. Do you remember that day, dear? And they were all on the kitchen floor. All on the kitchen floor. She had painted them all in different pieces of paper. They were all on the floor, exactly the same, to the detail. Incredibly detailed for I think she was 3 at the time. Incredibly detailed, and that was the impression that it made on her. So we came home, and that's what she wanted. It was like almost like she had to. And even now, it's like she has to create. She has to. You couldn't keep her away from it. For Harry, it was Legos. A lot of these kids want to create. They want to sort of have their hands busy and be doing something. So while Lego isn't necessarily a Waldorf toy, obviously, all that plastic, we had Legos like everywhere, because it would help him get to a Zen place. It would give him a spot where he could sit with his own thoughts and create. And he created the most amazing things. Somewhere I have a picture of the sewing machine that he created when he was like 7. And it would have worked. If I had threaded it, it would have worked. And that was just based on him looking at my sewing machine, and he would create the most amazing things. When he got older, because it's so important to keep them social enough, they're never going to be as social as other kids. Totally okay. But you want to keep them social enough. So as he got older, we made sure that he was involved in different things. So he was, we always had a church group going, always. He was always, and I would spend a lot of time with his leaders. And sometimes we had great adults, and sometimes we had jerks. And at every turn, I always have to say, this does not have anything to do with church. This has everything to do with the person I'm dealing with. But I would make sure that all of his leaders, that I had power with his leaders. And there was a time, remember the time we moved and he was like, please don't tell anybody that I have autism?
Yeah.
It lasted like 2 weeks. And I was like, dude, I have to tell somebody because this is happening and you are failing miserably and you're struggling. And we need to make sure that we give people the right tools. Afterwards, they were like, oh, okay, that makes more sense now. He was a teenager then. So you really want to be careful with that. But you also want to empower them enough that they feel okay enough to be able to say, I've got this going on. And that doesn't mean you should make excuses for me, but I've got this going on and I'm going to tell you if it's too hard, or I'm going to tell you if I have trouble. And so you have to raise them into the space of being able to talk to other people about what they have going on. It's really important. Really important. It also really helps them into adulthood. So Harry served a mission for our church. And so he's been home a year. So about 3.5 years ago, we were preparing for this. And I can remember we went to one ecclesiastical leader and he was like, you know what? I don't know. He may be not getting on a plane going anywhere because he's really got some struggles. And I remember I went to him and I said, listen, if this is something you want to do, because even though it's encouraged, definitely encouraged for the young men in our faith, it's not like you have to, you don't get to come to church. It's not like that. But it was something he really wanted to do. Having a sense of accomplishment, I think, is really important for these kids. Really important. So he really wanted to go. And I said, well, over here, Don doesn't think that you are ready. He would rather recommend you do something local. If you want to serve, do something local. And he was like, no, I'm going. So we sat down and we made a plan. Okay, here's what Don needs to see in order for him to be able to recommend you to go on this journey. And so we sat down and we came up with okay, you've got to make more contacts. You need to make eye contact with people, and that's a huge one because they don't want to make eye contact often. So you need to make sure you make eye contact when you're talking to somebody. You need to go out of your way to talk to other adults. So he had this, we made this list of things that he needed to do. And because they're so black and white and so pliable in that way, he was on it. Within 6 months, he was he had a psych eval that he had to go through because he, you know, that's just what they request for kids that have autism spectrum stuff. There's a little box you're supposed to check. In fact, we sort of laughed about that box later. For kids that have autism spectrum, that have struggled with depression, any kinds of struggles, they sort of want you to go through and make sure that everything's good, just so that you aren't feeling overly anxious while you're gone, because it is 2 years away from your family, and you get to talk to your family like twice a year after that. You get to email them every week, but they want to make sure that if you're going to go, that you are that you're able to, that you're not going to struggle so much. They want to prepare you in every way. So he flew through those interviews. In fact, that the psychiatrist said to me, at this point, if I had to diagnose him, I could not diagnose him. He was 19. He said, yeah, he's always going to have something going on, but you have done an incredibly good job. And again, that wasn't me patting myself on the back. That was me stepping back and going, okay, all of the stuff that I've been doing works. All of it works. Firm, tight boundaries, calling them on their stuff, being loving, building the connection between the two of you really works. And so I'm here to tell you, if you are in the thick of it and they are younger, keep going. And when you feel like you're going to fall over and you can't, you can't keep up, take a break. You both need the break. And really allow yourself to be kind to yourself, be good to yourself, make sure you get the time you need, and make sure you build the relationship with your partner, because when you're dealing with a special needs child, it can be so focused on the child that you forget to connect to each other. So you want to make sure that you're not only getting the respite for yourself, but you're getting the respite for your relationship with your partner, and that you're really sort of making sure you're on the same page. Now, I know at least 3 or 4 families right now that I'm working with where the partner is like, I don't believe in this diagnosis, or I think you should just send them to public school, or I think when it comes to special needs, I have to tell you, I don't know what would have happened to Harry in public school. I think he would have really struggled. And I know there are a lot of kids who struggle every single day in public school that have some stuff going on. And if that's your reality, then you've got to be on the same page with the teachers. You've got to talk to the staff. You have to really be an advocate for your child. Get an IEP when needed. Make sure that you are being incredibly diligent, because they need you to be their biggest cheerleader. I would say now in Harry's life, I'm still probably his biggest cheerleader. I will say to him every now and again, honey, you need to get a wife, or a girlfriend at least, because you call me like 4 times a day. I love him dearly. He's an amazing human being. I will also say that they are really good at manifesting things. So from the time he was about 6 years old, he wanted to drive trains. He also wanted to work at Legoland. I will tell you, when we lived in Idaho, he would tell everybody, when they'd say, what do you want to be when you grow up? He'd say, I want to work at Legoland. And, keep in mind, we lived in Utah, and Legoland was in California. And so people would laugh and go, oh, isn't that cute? Well, he manifested that. We moved here to San Diego, and he worked for 2 years at Legoland before his mission. And that was probably the best thing ever for him. He was 16 and 17 when he worked for them. And because it forced him to step outside of his comfort zone to get what he wanted. And the thing that he wanted was to work at Legoland. So he was able to see the end goal and go for it. And things changed for him so much. Things also, those were his first really big, keys into, I need to pay attention to my diet. But then he also went from having this really narrow diet to it really opening up. Like, he would come home and they have a staff cafeteria there where they can pick and choose from the things that they have there in their restaurants, and they can make their own things. And he'd tell me everything that he ate, and we would be like, what? You never would have eaten that. So his tastes changed. He was able to see the goal and go for it when it came to this job. He went on a mission, and I will tell you, it was not without struggle. Because he is so black and white and such a straight arrow, He was often put in situations with boys that weren't, young men that weren't. And so that was really hard for him. And he would write me home like every week and say, Mom, there are lots of people that didn't check that box, because he would know, and the box being the box on the form that you're supposed to check before they go on a mission about having autism spectrum stuff going on, because he would be able to see it in others very easily and very quickly, and see others that did not have the maybe the will that he had, because it had been instilled in him. So as an adult now, what's funny, like I said, he wanted to drive trains when he was 6 years old. He's a security guard for Metro Transit now, and he's working on becoming a train operator. So talk about manifesting. When they say they want to do something, you need to be listening, because they really have this like deep desire, and they want to be just like the rest of us. And they see themselves in a world where it's too noisy, and it's they just want to go within. And so you have to really help them balance that. So another mom asked about media for the older child. Listen, Harry is this kid that, and he's not a kid anymore, I guess. He'll always be my kid, but he can be listening to a podcast, watching a video on YouTube about a game, playing a different game on the computer at the same time, and the TV can be going. And he'll tell you everything that's going on in all those things. That doesn't mean that should always be what he does. Like he has to also learn, and he knows how to balance, because I've taught him that sometimes you just focus on one thing. It's incredibly hard for him to focus on just one thing. So we had family movie night here the other night, and he comes for that, even though he doesn't live here. He comes for family movie night, and we were watching a dragon movie because we were celebrating Michaelmas, and he was definitely on his phone at the same time. I don't say anything to him about that, because when I need him to focus, he'll focus. There was last year he'd been home from his mission about a month, and Eric and I went out of town for a week, and he was in charge, and nobody died. I mean, he did what he needed to do. He was able to focus. He was able to take care of his siblings and make sure they got where they needed to go. But they are very, very often, because they hone in on things. He didn't want to drive. He had an experience where he almost knocked down a garage when he was 16 with a car, and after that he was like, nope, no thank you. We tried to get his driver's license before his mission, and he just struggled so much. So in order to be a train operator, you have to have a driver's license. And when he came home, and he decided that this was his next goal. And so he finally got his driver's license. And I said to him like a day later, I said, hey, do you want to drive? He's like, no, this is not a train. That's the only reason why I want to drive. I just want to drive a train. So I had to sort of really laugh about that. The black and white is still there. And, he's starting to sort of think about dating some more. And I said, your future wife might want you to drive. He's like, well, she can drive. That's okay. I'm just a public transportation boy. So there are so many tender mercies as they're growing, and you have to be able to stand back, and you have to be able to go, okay, this is awesome, or oh man, this sucks. What can I do to get through it? When it comes to sort of the media use, listen to your gut, make rules, and explain to them why you're making them. I don't usually do any explanations for younger kids, obviously, because they just need to learn it. But when it comes to their teenagers, and they have these things that they want to do, especially because their brains work way different. They're way faster than ours are often. We just helped him balance. So I wanted him to be reading books, good books, as much as he was on games. And so we also had to make rules, because I had younger kids in the house, about when that could happen and how that looked. And so, I think you have to sort of work with yourself and talk to your partner and look at what would you like to see. Of course, in the perfect Waldorf world, you'd like to see him not on there at all, but that's not the reality. And so I think that it's important that you take the time. So anyways, we are over. So I hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you later. Bye.